Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special live Getting Tuned from the Northeast Comic Con, where it's guaranteed not boring and free parking. So, it's the last day of the show. Come on down before we close down. But for those of you who are at home watching this, thank you for tuning in. I got a great panel for my last panel of the day here. It is the art of the bizarre, and we got some bizarre stuff on stage. And they got puppets here too and stuff. So let's turn it over and have them introduce themselves. You got it. There we go. We got you both on screen. So
hi, my name is Joe Souza. I'm from, I created a Monstah Studios. We specialize in utilitarian sculptures, stage props, and creature designs and advertising, things along that nature.
Cool. And next,
I'm Tim Clarke, co-creator of Boglins Sectors. Worked for Jim Henson for many years on Sesame Street, Muppet Show, Great Muppet Caper, Dark Crystal, and Fraggle Rock, designing and building puppets. And still, 40 years later, still designing and building puppets like Boglins
and what we're seeing on the screen, you guys. I'll bring them closer, but you're seeing some really fascinating work right here. I'm loving this jar right in front of me here. And the Boglin puppets are great. I've seen them many times before and love them. This panel, and by the way, everybody in the audience, anyone at home, if you have questions, if you're at home, drop them in the comments. Anyone here at any point, just raise your hand, and I'm happy to pass along the questions to you guys. So the stuff both of you create definitely fall into bizarre. And there's so many different, art styles out there. What led you guys to this kind of out there type of design? Like what were your influences that said, I want to create kind of like the strange and unusual type of stuff that nobody's really doing?
Well, originally I wanted to do special effects in horror movies.
Okay.
Like kind of the old monster movies and the slasher movies of the 80s. And I really couldn't afford too much more than paper mache or cloth and stuff like that. And things just kept coming out comical, whimsical, and bizarre instead of gory. So I just kind of accepted it down the road and went with it and said, this is what I do. And I just like the color combinations and the uniqueness of each sculpture with the cloth. You can't be reproduced, so everything has its own look.
Yeah, I just want to say, I keep looking at your piece, and I love the way you did the teeth.
Thank you. That's I don't do that style too often, like the molar look.
Yeah,
that was something I was playing with this one.
They just look so great at the different angles you have them coming in, the different sizes. Everything's just gorgeous. How about you, Tim?
I guess for me, it goes back to horror movies from when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Like Frankenstein and Dracula and Wolfman, and my brother and I used to take our garage every year at Halloween and turn it into a haunted house, and we would make all these props and do all this crazy stuff. And the challenge in the neighborhood for kids was, could you get through the entire haunted house before you came out screaming? So. And we used to charge like 25 cents to go in. So it was one of the ways I made money, that and doing puppet shows when I was a kid for kids in the neighborhood. So
that's cool.
It was kind of, I don't know, it's funny when I think about it, because it's hard to pinpoint where the fascination comes. I would think it's probably from the Frankenstein and Wolfman movies.
Yeah. Yesterday I did the panel with the Frankenstein historian, the Boris Karloff historian. First of all, fantastic, fun interview. I thought I knew a lot about Boris until I talked to this guy.
Yeah.
But there was something that was very interesting to me, and he was talking about like Boris's makeup work and the stuff that he had to cover up in. And I kind of see, like, I can, not specifically Boris's stuff, but I look at your stuff, I can see how those would be masks if they were larger, Same thing with your stuff here. Like if they didn't have that jar in there, I can see how someone could wear it. And you said special effects is what you wanted to do. You're influenced by that stuff. So I can see that in your work. Now, when you guys were, I know, Tim, we've talked. You have
Sorry,
some.
move the mic closer.
Oh, are the mic? You know, I didn't even check to see if the mics are on. Do you want to just see if the mics are?
Oh, if they're not on, then
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's
then
right
I'll
at the top.
speak up.
No, right at. You can turn them on right.
I have
at the
no
top.
trouble projecting.
Yeah, that mic's
There we
on.
go.
If you want to turn it on, you,
Whoa.
you can turn yours on too. I'm sorry. It was kind of like I got in here. Yeah, I got in a little like as soon as we're supposed to go on,
Right.
so I forgot to check. But I know, Tim, we talked a bit about your training. We talked, just talking. And I'm happy. I want you to share that as well. But I want to hear: are you self-taught? Did you go to school?
I'm self-taught, and I did a little bit of schooling. I, pretty much hung out in the art class all through high school. They pretty much realized that, an early thing I was going to draw no matter what class I was in, whether it be math or English or art.
Yeah.
They kind of just let me do as little as possible and just stay in the art room and really, help nurture that for me.
Yeah.
And I had a real great art teacher in high school that, sent me to the Newport Art Museum for a bunch of different classes with sculpting and line drawing and things
Oh,
like
that's
that.
awesome.
And my parents were very supportive at the time too. So, I was lucky enough to have that. My father was a big comic book reader, so I always had exposure to, that kind of influence of monsters and things like that as well. So it's just something I grew up with. I don't remember not having it in my life.
And Tim, how about you? A little bit. I know, like we've personally just talked about it. What's kind of your training?
Art background?
Yeah, your art background.
High school teachers definitely were really a big encouragement. And I went to a high school on Long Island where your options when you graduated high school were either doctor, lawyer, or, engineer. So, to be somebody who was fascinated and interested in being in the arts, it was, you were unusual to say the least. And then I went to Pratt Institute and majored in art education. And in my last semester of my senior year, I took a course on puppetry with Kermit Love, who designed Big Bird and Snuffleupagus. And towards the end of the semester, he asked me what I was going to be doing after I graduated. And I said, well, I'm looking for a teaching job. But at that time, in the late 70s, they were closing down schools because this population had fallen off. And so he said, well, why don't you come and work for me? And I immediately said yes. And my first job working with Kermit was dyeing Snuffleupagus fur brown. And then later on, feathering Big Bird, which was a very long and tedious process.
I've heard stories from other people who have worked with
that's usually like the first job you get when you work in Muppets is feathering Big Bird. So, and then after working with Kermit for a year on all kinds of things like puppets for TV commercials, Kermit was really well known in New York for designing and building specialty ballet costumes. And we did a recreation of Picasso's costumes for Joffrey Ballet. And we also did a 20-foot high marionette for Don Quixote, where the windmill turns into the giant. And it had this huge mace and it swung across the stage. And it was actually the first time I ever saw a ballet stop for the applause of a set piece, which was really incredible, and it was fascinating to watch the ballet be created, with Balanchine there. And there was a woman who had memorized every ballet that Balanchine created. And she was instructional in telling the dancers what they had to do when, which would, just to me, to have that kind of visual memory was, it was amazing to watch that happen.
Yeah, that's amazing. With the, bizarreness stuff, I know, and I'm sure this is probably a yes for you, Tim, and I'll ask you too, but since you have worked, with Jim Henson, his designs fall under the bizarre, even for the Muppets.
Yeah.
But you also worked on Dark Crystal. Was anything that Jim was doing even before you went in to work for him, was that any part of an influence on you? I mean,
you bet. The first season of Saturday Night Live, Muppets did a short piece in that, The Land of Gorge, and those characters were kind of what led to the idea of doing Dark Crystal. And I remember watching it, when I was in college, and I just thought they were the most. And in many ways, I still think those characters were some of the best that Muppets did, just as pure character types,
Yeah. And Joe, how about you? Were you influenced by anything like Henson, or are you more horror movie? Like, what was?
It was definitely Dark Crystal with Henson for me. I mean, growing up, we watched the Muppets a lot. It was on, but it wasn't something that I really gravitated towards when I was younger. It was more of the darker,
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely Dark Crystal, Labyrinth, anything that had the puppets at all, claymation puppets, all that stuff was everything that I wanted to watch growing up. And wanted to try to emulate, later and have my own world, Jim Henson and the characters.
It's funny you said I did the same thing as a kid. I actually, when I was a kid, my parents, I don't want to say kid, starting around junior high, my parents knew that some days I needed a break from school, and they'd kind of let me just take a sick day once in a while. And when I took that sick day, I spent it building puppets. I would find stuff around the house that I knew no one was using, and I would try to build puppets because I was such a Henson fan. And I would do these try to create these crazy sketches of if I created a Muppet, and how would it be? And I would go find stuff. I taught myself a little bit how to sew just by figuring out, my mother's stuff there. And I just went off and built some of the worst stuff you've ever seen in your life. So, but yeah, I mean, luckily I had a little bit more later on in life, a formal puppetry training, which I don't use now. But yeah, I mean, I think, I was attracted to all that bizarreness too. I love the old Universal monsters. I wasn't much of a horror fan, but those things, just anytime I saw something that wasn't the exact norm, I loved it. And being a cartoonist, I see that in a lot of character designs. Going back, one of my all-time favorite character designs, and I know this is a little sidetrack, but is Ed Benedict, who designed Yogi Bear, the Flintstones, those type of characters. If you look at Boo Boo's design, and this to me falls under the bizarre, how he looks in front view and profile should not work.
Right.
But it works. And it's things like that. And so then when I started looking at art, that kind of was what I was looking at and stuff. So seeing Henson, seeing all these other things that, I'm looking at, that reminds me, I'm blanking on the name right now, but there was an artist back in the I think it was the 70s.
Who say Ed Roth, right?
Yeah, yes, totally.
Big Daddy Ed Roth.
Yeah. That's totally what I'm thinking right now.
A lot of the Nutty Mad models, the T-shirts, and all that stuff was around for my older cousins that I would hang around with. It was a little bit before me. So I would sketch from those, copy the drawings a lot growing up.
Exactly. I was the same way.
Ed Roth, Tim Burton, Jim Henson, probably my three biggest influences. Yeah.
No, it's fantastic. Man. Actually, I want to show this really quick. Do you mind if I?
Okay. Go for it.
I'm gonna bring it in this way. You guys don't have to get up here. Oh, it's got a nice weight to it too. Just bring it in closer to the camera so the people at home can. I mean, that looks great. Do you ever put anything inside these jars with them?
So I do a lot of horror shows.
Yeah.
And I have a friend that does wet specimens. So preserved lizards and snakes and stuff like that. So we'll meet up at the show and she'll bring a couple in a cooler and we'll chuck them in the jars at the show and sell them together for the specimen in the jar. It was just something we fooled around with at the first show, and they just sold all of them right off the shelf, 3 or 4. So we're doing a couple more each show and bringing them down. It's probably the most bizarre thing I've seen in them.
And can I see one of the Boglins to show?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. So
that's King Ward.
Just the feel
brand new this year.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, I remember these when I was a kid, and I'll be honest, I never had one. I wanted one, but my mother thought they were too kind of creepy looking and didn't want it in the house.
They are.
And I think this right here is, and you actually have a little lever in the back here to move the eyes and stuff. I love that. It's just to show, if you don't mind, I'll show the inside.
No, go ahead.
If you can see that lever right there, that's a little white piece of plastic. That moves the eyes in here. And these are just gorgeous.
Thanks.
Gorgeous stuff. And you mold all these and sculpt them, and
this one is actually based on one of the English characters that was made later on. he's very much like King Glob, but just more. He's King Wart, so he's got more bumps and creases and all that stuff. So
now let me just.
But he was the original of this one was sculpted by an English sculptor, who was working for Ideal, I think at the time. So some of the original Boglin King Dwark Dwark is modeled after the first one that I did. Then after that, depending on which toy company was producing them, either Maureen and myself would do sculpts for Boglins, or the toy company would hire independent sculptors to do stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and just because we're talking about Boglins right now, how did you come up with the idea? Like, what's the story behind, not just even coming up, what's the story of the Boglins?
After working on Dark Crystal, and I had been in the London workshop, they sent me back to New York to work on Fraggle Rock. And towards the end of the production of Fraggle Rock, I went to Jim and I said, Jim, we're doing such amazing and innovative things with materials and character development, creatures. And none of the toy companies are doing that. They're like, even for Dark Crystal, they ended up making little hard plastic injection molded figurines, just like action figures.
Yeah.
But it didn't really relate to the foam latex creatures we were making. And I said, we should have a section here at Henson where we develop toy product ideas and we present them to the toy companies for them to produce, rather than it coming the other way around. And I always say this was the biggest, best kick in the pants I ever got, because Jim just looked at me and he said, Tim, it's a wonderful idea. I just don't want to do it. And so then after Fraggle Rock finished, they put a lot of the puppet builders on freelance staff, because they had puppet builders for Sesame Street, puppet builders from Muppet Show, puppet builders from Dark Crystal, and puppet builders from Fraggle Rock. So there was kind of an oversupply in the New York shop. And I started working freelance for them, doing toy design and development. But I also started working on creating toy products that I would pitch to toy companies. The first one was Sectors, which was an insect that you put your hand in it, and the legs and the feet became your fingers. Yeah. And they would fly around, and they had action figures on the back. Yeah. And Boglins was supposed to be a new and separate entity, but Coleco wanted to do Boglins at first also. And then they decided, well, what happened was, unfortunately, Coleco went bust because of Atom Computers. It was such a complete failure that they sold them, none of them worked. They were all returned, and it was a massive economic failure for the company. So Coleco went out of business. So we got the rights to Boglins back, and then we pitched it to Mattel, and they loved it. They got it right away, and it went to market. And it's interesting because, the topic of this, panel is, why are people interested in the bizarre? And I remember when we were at Coleco, it was the height of Cabbage Patch dolls. And everybody was puzzled as to why they were selling so well. And Tom Kramer, who was the head of Seven Towns, who was my agent, he said, it's because Cabbage Patch dolls don't look right. Like before that, baby dolls' faces were always perfectly symmetrical and beautiful. Yeah. And he said his theory is that people have more empathy for something that's not perfect. Interesting. That you feel you have a greater connection, whether you're a little girl or a little boy, to take care of something that isn't perfect. Yeah. And I think, it's ever since I started, selling Boglins again, the amount of women who come up to me and say, oh, Boglins, I had them when I was a little girl. And I go, really? Then they said, yeah, they were so cute. And I go, really? Boglins is cute? And they say, yeah, they're ugly cute. And it kind of reinforced that theory to me. So maybe that's why I don't,
that makes sense, because I was actually going to ask you guys later on that question. Why do you think people are attracted to it? But since we're on that topic, do you have anything you want to add?
Since you told me the topic of this panel, I've been kind of mulling it over, and myself, I mean, I'm attracted to it because that's what I grew up with. I see a lot of people come to the table because it's something unique and something they don't see all the time. It doesn't fall, same thing with Boglins, and a lot of the artwork here, it's not something you see in the mainstream days. I think that's what really brings a lot of people into it. It's not, your everyday art or your everyday toy or, something that's you're going to see every place that you go. It's a complete different aesthetic. And other than that, I really, I've been thinking about it. I really can't come up with too much more.
It is interesting because, you go back to the time of like the freak show, and people go see that, and everybody's into, and you're just curious, and
the amount of people that touch my work, and I'm sure the same thing with the Boglins, like they almost can't help it.
Well, that's
whether you're 80 or 80, they're picking at it.
Right.
They're touching at it. They're trying to figure out what's going on, and then the same thing with the Boglins and the cloth mache. And a lot of people don't recognize it as that. They think it's clay. They think that it's fab. I mean, they think it's leather. Mostly the kids get it because they worked with paper mache, cloth mache, recently. But the adults always, think that it's leather or something.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask you. I know you mentioned, the paper mache and stuff. I was going to ask you, what are you still using that?
I stuck with the fabric mache. I really fell in love with the textures, the looks, and the fact that no one else was doing it. Everybody was sculpting the clay, everybody was casting resin, and just the amount of depth I can get in my undercuts and stuff like that you can't get by casting. I really think gives the dark compared to the light. It really makes it pop.
Yeah, no, this is fan. I love the expression on this guy here. Like there's a few different feelings I get when I look at your guy here. One is like there's a giant fan blowing his face back, like he's in the wind. He's like or
on a motorcycle.
Something like that. Or he's like just coming at you, like he's ready to just jump at you. But I don't feel he's like an evil guy or anything. He feels
as much as I try to, I've never once come across any kid that's scared. No one's ever been afraid of him. It's always a whimsical. I like to say I make monsters that make people smile.
I like that.
So that's pretty much what
I love.
And
that.
I've stuck with it because I find it unique, and I really love the colors and the.
And I'm sorry, I just keep staring because he's staring at me right now. The angle I have him on. Let me just see if there's any comments in the. Nope, no comments yet. Anybody have any questions back here? Yes.
So you've anticipated my question about the interface of the horror and the cute. Like if I think of a Lovecraftian horror, I don't see any Yog-Sothoth dolls, but I see tons of Cthulhu dolls. And if you Google baby Cthulhu, you see tons of cute Cthulhu.
Yeah.
So if you're saying that a Cabbage Patch doll is on the one hand it's kind of cute, but on the other hand it doesn't quite look. I mean, why would a baby be in a Cabbage Patch anyway? Like a pod person or something? So I must be identified with the Boglin, for example. It's not completely horrible, it's lovable and it's horrible, and I feel the same way. I know I'm horrible inside, that's how I feel about myself, but I hope that there's part of me that's lovable. So that's maybe what I'm identifying with.
But, when I was starting to work on new concepts for Boglins, but a little over a year ago, I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and I went to the information desk after walking around for a while, and much to my amazement, I said to the woman at the desk, I'm looking for things that are grotesque, so can you recommend to me different sections in the museum? And she said, go to the Greek section. There's Greek deities and gods that are grotesque. go to the Egyptian section over here, you'll see these different deities and gods that are grotesque. In the South American section, in the Japanese section, in the Indonesian, and she knew them all. It was fascinating to me. And so I just went around taking photographs. The great thing about the Met is that you're pretty much allowed to photograph everything there except for special exhibitions.
Yeah.
And it's always been a resource for me.
I haven't been there in a while. I love that place. I need to get there.
It's the best.
I don't think I've been there since I was in my master's program in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a while. I need to get back into a museum. That sounds great. I'm just keep looking at the computer and making sure nothing's going on there. So when I look and think of the bizarre, like I said, when I first heard about this panel, I thought freak shows, I thought those type of things. I see that looking at a lot of the type of things that became horror movies that influenced you guys and stuff. Like looking at the Boglins, I know there's a story behind the characters. Just look at I think you said ugly cute was where you said ugly cute, and I'm looking at them and you kind of look into their eyes, the way you did the eyes and everything. Yeah. There's a little bit of heart. There's a soul to those characters, and I want to ask you in a moment about it and about story with the Boglins, if you have one or if they have specific ones. But I want to know, are your stuff story-based, Joe, or are you just creating things from your imagination?
Right now, I'm just pulling things from my imagination and creating stuff and developing some characters, but it's mostly just creating different, unique-looking pieces.
Do you plan on any story with these guys? Because
we've had a couple people, toss some things around together, and we try to put something together, but it just seems like there's just so much to do. So little time to do.
Because honestly, I love these things, but
I'd like to get them animated, working on getting some moving parts.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say.
So I'm working on some different types of puppets ideas with them, incorporating the soft foams for the moving parts, but using like the hard, paper mache to capture some of the details that I want, but still having it be able to have the movement like the Boglins.
Yeah.
Like they're not so rigid, is what I'm playing with now.
Yeah.
We would love to get some sort of story going behind them, but everything I come up with, I'm just not happy with yet.
I just love it. I want to see, like you mentioned, animation. Like that's the thing. I see like an animated story with it.
It's like I'm trying to figure out like a unique look, like a mix between claymation and actual puppetry type of effect.
Yeah. Wow.
And I have to say, Joe runs his own shows. He does Retro Expo, and he also does Monstah Expo. And
I think I got them. Retro Expo
This guy is always busy. He's always busy.
Monster Expo. I took them off your table today. Wherever I get to that part. So there's a QR code. I'll hold it up for a moment. Where is it? Up higher. Higher. There it is.
There it is.
Oh, okay, never mind. I'm not going to be good at this. But you guys, make sure you guys head down and check up if you're depending where you are. It's in what area is it in? The Boston area?
Yeah, it's pretty much in the Boston area, but it's more down towards the Cape for retro. Monstah Expo is in Fairhaven, and Retro is in Tiverton, which is near Newport, Rhode Island.
And just since because I'm not familiar with the cons, can you talk a little bit about what they're about? And
so both of my shows are really based heavy in the arts because I have a lot of artist friends and I'm a big supporter of the arts. And I'm trying to build something a little different than your everyday, autograph show that, everybody goes to. So we have a lot of artists. The Retro Expo is focused more towards the comic books and, cartoons and TV shows of the 80s and 90s. And Monstah Expo is more focused on the horror aspect, every generation and idea of horror. But I also want to tie in monsters because, in my opinion, Snuffleupagus is a monster. Cookie Monster is obviously a monster. So I don't want it to just be a gory horror show. It's a creature, show, more of a monster show, things along those lines.
Oh, that's awesome. That's all. They sound fun. I may have to check them out.
I need some panels down the road. So.
Oh, we'll be in touch then. But anyway, getting back to my question about story, is there a story behind the characters? Do you have anything planned?
Well, I have written kind of a loose Boglin history, and I'm adding to it all the time. I never wanted it to be like a set canon, because I want kids to be able to, make up their own stories of where Boglins come from and who they are, so that it's personal to them. So the way that I did that is by having different scientists make different observations about Boglins in the wild, and they don't always agree as to what the Boglins are doing, or what where they came from, or how they're moving forward into the human world.
Yeah, that's it's just like I said. There's so much character just looking at it, and I did want to ask you, and I don't think, I've known you for a few years, and I don't think I've ever asked you this.
Yeah.
Because you've done the work for Henson, you've built puppets, you've built stuff. What was it about toys that made you want to build toys and not continue
because I, as a kid, enjoyed working with puppets, and I just didn't see anything on the marketplace for kids to play with that was puppet related. And there was a big, rejection of puppets as toy products, because they figured that puppets were only for really young kids. And I remember when we showed Sectors, it was the first time that fur fabric and hard plastic had been put together as a toy product, because before that, fur fabrics and plush was always soft-bodied and for little kids. And hard plastics were action figures for, mainly boys back then, not so much anymore. And the idea of combining those two things was very unusual. And yet it worked, because the fur was, creepy, and, like the hairy spider and all that stuff. So it made a big, it was a real departure, and made a point of difference that people were attracted to.
It was definitely my favorite toy line.
The Boglins were
Boglins and Sectors. I had them. I had Sectors. I had every single one of them.
I again, that was something that I never got as a kid. My like I said, my mother thought they were creepy, and I don't think she wanted to be looking at them in my room. But I did watch the Sector cartoon. I did enjoy when those commercials came on for Boglins, and I saw them in stores. And you're right, when people come up and touch it, every time I was in a store, because they had that little cage, right, that they were in, I used to stick my finger
to see how it would move.
And I was like, oh, that was so cool.
I can remember getting my Boglin on Christmas morning, and I remember opening it and being in the cage. And at the time, my younger cousin was living with us. I was maybe 12, and she was probably 4 or 5, and she was visibly, moved by it. Like right away, she was scared of it. In my head, I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. So it was a good couple of years of torturing her with that Boglin before.
That's it was a great product line. I mean, it still is. I'm just saying, back then, I knew people who had it. So like when I went to friends' houses who had it, I'd always pick it up and kind of just put it on my hand for a few minutes, even if we weren't, using them. So I wanted to get to the question, which we already answered. Why do you think people are into the bizarre and stuff? And we talked about what is the bizarre, that like what attracted you to it, like what made you want to create bizarre stuff. But one of the things I'm curious about is the bizarre today. Both of what you're doing, even though I love it, has a bit of a retro feel. The Boglins came from the past. They're making their comeback now. This we mentioned looks like Roth, and
80s and 70s.
80s and stuff. It's retro. Do you think the feel of this stuff today in the market for the bizarre is retro? Is there stuff going on that is more modern that people are into? What do you guys think of the bizarre today? I mean, should it be? Is this bizarre because it has a retro feel to it, or is it bizarre other stuff going on? What do you guys think?
Well, I think the current cartoons that are on TV,
Mm-hmm.
if anything, are more bizarre than when I was a kid. You know, it's like you look at Ren and Stimpy, you
Yeah.
look at Rick and Morty,
Yeah.
and I don't know. There's
I think Rick and Morty has a very
yeah,
recognized,
yeah,
monster
very
feel
much
to
so.
it.
So
And I'm sure they
you know,
were
and I
influenced
think
lot
it's
by the same
a
thing.
cycle.
There's actually Boglins in Rick and Morty.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a cycle of what people grew up with in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
the 70s and the 80s, and then they have kids and they want to kind of reminisce about what they had as a child
Yeah.
and give that to their children. And when, you know, I think that was a big part of
Mhm.
Boglin's resurgence.
Yeah.
But now, the great thing I have to say about doing this show is the last time I did New England Comic Con, it was a lot of the Boglin fan base of guys who were in their, you know, anywhere from 35 to 45
Yeah.
coming back and buying them. But now I'm getting, you know, as I play with them at my booth space, you know, I get little kids, girls and boys, who want to know, what is that? How does it work? And, you know, and I let them try it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they walk around, you know, and they look at all the other stuff, and then they come back and they'll go, I want that one. You know, like,
Yeah.
and you know, the father or the mother say, yeah, but you know, this is the only one thing you get, because these are not inexpensive.
Yeah.
No, I want a Boglin. So that,
Mhm.
you know, to see, you know, that kind of ageless connection
Yeah.
coming back is the best to me. You know, it's wonderful to see kids reacting to it the same way they did when, you know, he
Kids
was
just,
little
kids
and
just
you were
don't
little.
play with toys like they used to, and there's just not that offering of toys. Like, we don't get the commercials when we come home from school with other kids playing with toys, showing us how fun this toy can be, and use your imagination and create these other things. It's you just don't see that. My kids never played with toys the way that I did. You know, setting up your toys or whoever you chose to, you know, do it, and to see people playing with puppets again and doing things like that. And I just think it's a lot harder to show someone something new these days. You know, to shock someone, or to, you know, come with something new and bizarre, that it's hard to not go back to, you know, the classics, the Universal monsters, and then into the 80s. 80s was huge with every kind of monster. You know, as soon as Gremlins came out, Boglins, Ghoulies, you know, they were just an endless, you know, supply of that stuff. You could not see it.
We're going to wrap up in a moment, but I have one question for your thoughts on, and when I think of the bizarre, and this is why I saved it for last, and I go back to my childhood, I think of Sid and Marty Croft stuff. Sorry.
Yep.
Was that anything? What do you guys think of that? Was that any inspirations to you guys? Did you look at that? How were you feeling? Because look, I look back at those shows, I watch them, and you know they're kind of garbage, but they're fun.
Exactly.
And they but the stuff is just out there. Out there in the puppet costumes, all the stuff they did. What were your thoughts on that era and influence of the bizarre?
Growing up, that's what I sought after. I loved that stuff. You know, Great Space Coaster. What was the other one that would come on a lot around that same time? But all the things that were different, that weren't your normal G.I. Joe, Transformers. You know, the mainstream stuff like the Sectors and Boglins was always what I tended to, you know, gravitate towards. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. It happens. I do that a lot on this show, because I get so involved into the people's conversation, you know, the conversation and the answers, that I forget what my next question is going to be. Like, I need to take notes before I come on these shows sometimes.
The content of the show really didn't matter to me. It was what it was. I would watch Davey and Goliath just because it was a different type of format. You know, if it was a puppet, if it was anything, it would just, I would go towards it right away and try to make it, like you said, I'd have my own puppet shows at home, making my own creatures. So it was just always something that I gravitated towards. But it's definitely a product of the 80s, without a doubt.
How about you? Was there anything that their stuff affected
for
you?
me, Sid and Marty Croft stuff came when I was already a teenager, so I wasn't really that interested in it. I remember watching H&R Puff and stuff, and I was like, this is so over the top weird. I just thought it was like, what the heck is going on here? But I didn't really follow it that much. For me, it was more watching Muppets on, you know, the Ed Sullivan Show and, you know, other things that Jim and that crew were doing when I was little. So, you know, that was more of an influence in my interest in puppetry.
Yeah.
And also Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, which was brilliant, you know, television show puppets, and Shari Lewis, and you know, that was what was on when I was young. And there were, I have to say, like Winky Dink, which was a very odd program, you know, and Andy Devine back then had a show with puppets on kids television on like Saturday mornings. And it's so old, and I was so little that my memories of it are very hazy, you know, but I remember it being fascinated by it, and Howdy Doody and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, they're all great stuff. I'm sorry, I'm getting a call. I have to decline that in a moment. But yeah, no, all that stuff was great. I grew up on a lot of the reruns and stuff that that some of the stuff you were mentioning. And when you mentioned Muppets on the Ed Sullivan, it made me think I have that DVD. What's it called? Muppets. I think it's Muppets Magic, and it has all their appearances and their like. That was
some brilliant stuff.
Really, yeah. I look back and I like looking at the stuff, and I do this with comics and animation. I always go back, and I don't look at a lot of what's going on today. I'll look back at what was created that inspired the artists that I enjoy, that I'm looking at, who's doing stuff today. And like I see all that stuff, and you know, like I said, I'm a big Muppet fan, and watching those older stuff that I didn't get to see as a kid, because the Muppet Show was around when I was a kid, but the other stuff wasn't, and I'm like, that's just fascinating. You know, the stuff is fascinating, and just the way they handled those things again falls right into the bizarre, the creatures they were creating. And I mean, listen, we could do a whole panel just on the art of the Muppets and talk about their craziness and stuff. But
very much so.
Yeah, it's anyway. I think we should wrap it up, unless you guys have a question. I was going to say, is there any questions before we go?
Yeah, actually, I actually once said to someone, because honestly, I do kind of believe it. You can make any character design adorable if you get the body language right. What is your experience / opinion on that?
I'm sorry.
She said you can make any character adorable if you get the body language right. What's your experience on that? Have you guys worked with trying to get the adorable out of?
Have I done the adorable? Is that what you're asking me?
More like
I've actually designed back in the 90s. I designed a whole girls line of girls product, and it was called Funky Girls, and they had Diva Girl, Angel Girl, and a bunch of other things. And that came out of my daughter used to have Lisa Frank stationery and products when she was really little. And then as she got to be 11 or 12 kind of thing, she lost interest in it. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. You know, like she thinks that's too young now.
Yeah.
And I designed that line based on her ideas, you know, to have girls who are actually role playing and doing different things and singing and performing and all that stuff. And it was quite successful for quite a while. So
that's great.
Yeah.
What I meant was, do you think that you could make a horrifying character kind of cute if you find just
That's pretty much what I do without trying. Like I was commissioned once to make a Darth Maul, and he came up. Like I can't make them to be terrifying, or even if I set off to make a dragon and want to make it, he still ends up whimsical, colorful, and so yeah, I would say that you could pretty much, if you got the body language right and made those eyes look big and innocent, you can make anything look adorable, whether it's grotesque as it is to begin with. Yeah.
It really is the perception of the person who's looking at it. It's not always what we're projecting, you know, it's, or what we think is, like I said, the idea that women came up to me and had these as little girls, when these were brought out by Mattel, it was a very defined line. Oh, that's a boy's toy.
There was no crossover then.
Right, exactly. And even the commercial, if you go back and look at the original commercial, it's all about boys scaring their 8th grade aunt, boys scaring their sisters, you know.
Which is like, exactly what I did as soon as I took
right. And so Yeah, humans are so diverse.
Yeah.
And what culturally, what you believe is horrific versus what you think is sympathetic, is very diverse also.
Well, I think they did that really well in the '80s with the Garbage Pail Kids cards, where they kind of were parroting the Cabbage Patch Kids, and they would make, it was basically making Cabbage Patch Kids look disgusting, but people found them so adorable that they ended up, like collecting them, buying them, and they were loving those cards. I remember being in school and people just bringing their cards, and we would look at them all the time. I never really had any of those because I was always doing other, like I liked the other superhero stuff at the time or whatever. But I would look at those. I'd be like, wow, look at that art. Look at how cool that is. And people are just like, look how cute this character is. And it's like, boogers hanging down. And it's just, it was a fascinating line. And I think they recently brought it back a few years ago. They're still doing them.
Like 20 times the price of.
Yeah.
Well, humans love satire, and they love making fun of and ridicule, just political people and everything else in between.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like that gentleman said earlier, to go back onto your question, was, talking about Cthulhu, who's probably one of the most terrifying characters in literature. Now you can find baby Cthulhu. Cthulhu is hard to spell, all these different incredibly cute Cthulhus. So, you can take Cthulhu and make him Clue. Yeah, I think you can Clue. I think you could do that with pretty much anyone.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions, or?
I was wondering, in like last 20 years, the industry must have changed. Is it easier now to break in?
Well, as far as the toy business, it's unfortunately independent and outside inventors and designers has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, because everything now for major toy companies has to be driven by a television show or a movie or some huge licensing agreement. And so like a lot of, when I first started designing and developing toys, the amount of people are still doing it is very, very small, because it's even harder and harder to get into. So having the opportunity to bring these guys back, but with a small, I worked with Chris, who was in sales at Melissa and Doug, and he kept after me. He wanted to place it at Jazzwares. Jazzwares didn't want to do it. And then finally he just said, why don't we do it ourselves? And I said, yeah, I think we should do a Kickstarter to help fund it. And he said to me, what's a Kickstarter? So that was just it's like you constantly have to be changing your approach, and everybody said to me I was kind of crazy to go to Comic-Cons and sell Boglins, because like, how are you ever going to, make any money doing that? But, it's been really a great way to have a grassroots attachment to the people who are interested in them, and for little kids to see them for the first time. And I love watching, like today, I had a little boy who came in with his parents, and his dad is holding his hand, right? And he starts walking up the aisle, and I'm playing with the Boglin, and he turns around, and he's walking backwards away from me while he's watching me work the Boglin. And I was like, and he didn't buy one, but like, I know that thing is in his head now.
Yeah.
For good, So
that's great. I do have one last question, and this is for both of you guys. And maybe Tim, you can focus on maybe a toy aspect of it. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people out there who love to create, the toy. You said there's a lot of independent people working. What do you guys recommend for people who want to get into start creating, whether it's toys, whether it's these designs? What do you recommend for people to start experimenting with? How should they be looking at creating? What should they be thinking about whether it's a supply they should be experimenting with, or some type of knowledge they should be learning to start on their path to create? What do you guys think?
Well, I think there's a bunch of different roads you can go with that question. I guess if you have absolutely no inkling already of which way you want to go, I mean, I would say start with some pencil and paper and, start figuring out what works with you and get your hands in some clay and start with the three, basic mediums and see.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if like an artist is already established, he knows, what medium he wants to go with. And then if we were going to go further, it's the exposure. Because I've been doing this for about 25 years, but the past 10 years with the internet and it's just moved so much faster. Yeah. The first 15 years was a snail's pace, doing the wrong shows, not being able to get the exposure, not being able to, have people see my work. And just getting the idea out of my head that I'm going to go to my first show and sell out and everybody's going to, love it and all that other stuff. Yeah. But, I mean, for a non-creative, I don't want to say non-creative, but someone who's not creating at the time, I would say just start with getting those ideas out onto some paper. And at least if you don't go with it today, 2 years down the road, you might find those again and go, now I can focus on this a little more. I have more time, or I have a better idea I can put into it and, work it a little bit more. Art is a lifelong journey. It's not something that you're going to do,
absolutely,
in a week or, a month or even a year. It's
you're
going to do your lifetime.
Yeah. And do you have anything to add, or?
Do something different. Don't copy other people's work.
There you go.
If you're gonna make an impression and stand out, you have to have something that's unique and different. And Joe's a perfect example of that. I mean, I know that he's been influenced by my work, but that doesn't look like a Boglin.
Yeah, no.
It's his own creation. It's his own monster. It's and that's probably the most important thing. If you really want to be a creative person, it should be coming from your heart, your soul, your imagination, and your idea of what needs to be out there, not somebody else's concept or idea or design.
All right, and with that, I think we'll end for today. We went a little over, but we are the last panel at the show, so it was okay. I want to thank you guys for coming on.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed talking to you guys.
And thank you, Gary.
Yes, Gary, thank you.
Not boring.
For letting independent artists be here and supporting us, because it's really important, and I really appreciate it.
And that's what I meant with Northeast Comic Con. This has been a great show for me to meet other artists and get out of your shell, see what's out there, meet people to tell you, where you can go, show you different paths, different roads. It's a great place to meet people, connect, and move yourself further. I
got to say, this is my first time at this show, and I've had the best weekend.
Excellent.
Seeing people, talking with people, meeting people. Good. It's been a fantastic place. You're right. Northeast Comic Con, great place to come to. So with that, you guys, I will see you guys on Tuesday at my regular, actually it's going to be 9 p.m., not 8:30. I'm having Mark Arnold, author, pop culture author. You're going to love that one. I will see you guys then. Thank you guys for watching all the Getting Tuned live here at the Northeast Comic Con, where it's guaranteed not boring with free parking. And it'll be back again soon. And hopefully I'll be back with this again. I'll see you guys soon.